International News Edition. His Majesty the King and Bahrain's monarch discussed ties in the region and agreed that the war on terror is a war to protect Islam and its moderate and tolerant teachings. The King and the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for the Global Coalition to counter Daesh discussed developments in the war against the terrorist organization. And the King checks on the Jordan National Center for Amputee Rehabilitation, which provides prosthetic limbs to injured armed forces personnel. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King and Bahrain's King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa discussed closer cooperation between the two countries in various fields. During talks at Basman Palace, the two leaders expressed their pride in the advanced and distinguished level Jordanian-Bahraini relations had reached. During a one-on-one meeting before the leaders were joined by top aides, they discussed latest regional developments, especially efforts to combat terrorism and extremism and bring about security and stability in the region. The two leaders agreed that the war on terror is a war to protect Islam and its teachings of tolerance and moderation from the brutal and criminal actions of the Daesh terrorist and cowardly gang. The group's actions, they said, would unify the world community to combat, defeat and eliminate it. The meeting also tackled ways of cooperation between the forces of Jordan and Bahrain. The Bahraini monarch said he was in Jordan to offer condolences over the profound loss of martyr pilot Muad Kasasbeh, who lost his life in the fight against the terrorists and criminals while defending his country and religion. King Hamad pledged Bahrain fully supports Jordan in its efforts to ward off and eliminate terrorism. King Abdullah led top civic and military officials to bid the Bahraini monarch farewell at the end of his brief visit. His Majesty the King received U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for the Global Coalition to counter Daesh, John Allen. The King and Allen discussed the latest developments in the war against the terrorist organization and the international coalition's efforts to defeat it. The meeting was attended by His Royal Highness Prince Faisal Ibn Hussein and His Majesty's Advisor for Military Affairs, General Mish'al al-Zabn. King Abdullah, the Supreme Commander of the Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army, called on the Jordan National Center for Amputee Rehabilitation at the Al Hussein Medical Center. The center was established in 2007 as a specialized prosthesis facility. During a tour of the Royal Rehabilitation Center of the Royal Medical Services, the King was briefed on the prosthetics section on its role of rehabilitating military personnel to help them pursue their lives and activities. During the tour, where he was accompanied by His Royal Highness Prince Faisal Ibn Hussein and other officials, the King had a first-hand look at the progress of work by the center's medical and technical teams. He saw a number of cases of amputees who had upper or lower artificial limbs or other support devices at the center. King Abdullah had recently directed the armed forces and the Royal Medical Services to provide up-to-date smart prosthetic arms for injured military personnel. Prince Charles of Wales left Amman at the end of a two-day visit to the kingdom. Prince Charles held talks with His Majesty on Jordanian-UK ties and regional and international developments. During his two-day trip, the Prince of Wales also toured the Zaati refugee camp, where he stopped at an UNRWA center and met with Syrian refugees who told him about their plight and the challenges they face. His Highness Prince Ghazi ibn Muhammad, senior advisor to His Majesty the King, led senior officials to bid the Prince of Wales farewell. Prime Minister and Defence Minister Abdullah Mansour joined a meeting of the Lower House's Finance Committee to discuss the Defence Ministry's 2015 budget. In a briefing, Director of Strategic Planning at the Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army, Major General Nail al-Raggad, said the 2015 Armed Forces draft budget had been raised to $2.5 billion dinars. He said the draft was debated with the Finance Ministry, which had set spending at 955 million dinars. Mansour said the armed forces were fully carrying out their role with a minimum budget, but needed much more in view of the regional conditions. The budget, he said, is small compared to regional countries, but the armed forces remained a considerable striking force. The committee members said the armed forces deserved more support to meet their needs in view of the current circumstances and the kingdom's efforts in the fight against terrorism. Minister of Interior Hussein Majali said Jordan maintains a solid internal front against threats and challenges, and the country is impregnable to its enemies. He said security forces have lived up to their responsibility of protecting lives and properties, and that together with the armed forces they could ward off dangers. He told security officials that Jordan is determined to pursue the fight against terrorism and extremism and will take every measure to ensure its security and stability. He told the meeting, attended by the directors and senior officers of the Public Security Department, Civil Defense and Gendarmerie, that the Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army had proved their ability to protect the kingdom both internally and externally. The integral role of security bodies, he stressed, had laid the rest attempts by stray forces to undermine the country's security and unity.
The meeting was a success. The plans set are quite down to earth and based on available resources, including human resources, equipment, communication and command control. Our internal front has been solid and cohesive since the Jordanian state was founded. It's been reinvigorated or revitalized every now and then. We saw the ugly incident, the assassination of our martyred hero. I think that even if rumors sometimes seem positive, from the obvious they imply integrities. Listen to us. The truth is that no one in Jordan is in a higher tower. You can reach any official anytime.
Her Majesty Queen Rani Al Abdullah sent a televised message to the government summit held in Dubai under the patronage of Vice President and Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. The summit, titled Shaping Future Governments, was also attended by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, as well as a number of officials from around the world. In her address, Her Majesty explained that the sadness and grief of Jordan, united in condolence for our martyred Captain Mu'adh al-Kasasbeh, God rest his soul in peace, have kept her from attending the summit in person. Her Majesty emphasized that education policies in the Arab world needed to be changed to ones that ensured quality learning for our children, instilling in them the true values of religion, patriotism, coexistence and hard work. In conclusion, Her Majesty urged leaders to move forward together and fast to reach a new, secure reality founded on coexistence and respect, and whose goal is a decent life for every citizen. President of the Czech Republic, Miloš Zeman, arrived in Amman heading a delegation of businessmen. During the two-day trip, the Czech leader will hold talks with His Majesty the King on forging closer cooperation between the two countries in various fields. The two leaders will also discuss regional developments, especially efforts to combat terrorism and extremism, and bring about security and stability in the region. Over to Syria, the so-called Islamic State or Daesh group has withdrawn some of its insurgent and equipment from areas northeast of the Syrian city of Aleppo. The move adds to signs of increasing strain the terror group has been under in the Syrian provinces it controls. The militant group has recently lost ground to Kurdish and Syrian government forces elsewhere in the country. Residents and activists in Aleppo said they saw Daesh convoys evacuating several small villages in northeastern Aleppo and heading eastwards. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the ultra-radical group had redeployed forces from Aleppo province to join battles further east with Kurdish forces and mainstream rebel groups. The militant group is also under pressure from the heaviest US-led airstrikes, which are now being intensified. In Iraq, US and partner nations conducted 6 airstrikes since yesterday in their battle against Daesh terrorists. The Combined Joint Task Force said the strikes hit a tactical unit and destroyed a building and heavy machine gun near the city of Mosul. Strikes also hit near Fallujah, Beiji, Al-Assad and Kirkuk. In Baghdad, the capital, at least 13 civilians were killed and more than 30 others wounded in a suicide attack targeting a Shiite neighborhood. A second explosion killed 2 others in a northern suburb. The bombings were the latest in a string of deadly attacks to hit the Iraqi capital in the last 2 weeks. All football in Egypt was postponed indefinitely after at least 19 people were killed following clashes between fans and police outside a stadium in the capital, Cairo. A health ministry spokesman said the final toll was 19 dead, but the public prosecutor's office said there were 22 fatalities. Most of the dead were suffocated when the crowd stampeded after police used tear gas to clear the fans trying to force their way into a league match between 2 Cairo clubs, Zamalek and Inbi. The deaths occurred when fans were crushed in the stampede after police fired tear gas at Zamalek supporters attempting to get into the stadium. Mourners gathered to pay farewell to the victims. President Abdel Fattah Sisi has promised an investigation. Football matches are often a flashpoint for violence in Egypt, where 72 fans were killed at a match in Port Said in February 2012. Since then, Egypt has curbed the number of people allowed to attend, and supporters have often tried to storm stadiums they are banned from entering. 2 parties in Yemen walked out of resumed talks on the country's political crisis. Islah, a big opposition party, and the smaller Nasrist organization said they received threats from the dominant Houthi movement. Yemen's political crisis risks escalating into a full-blown civil war, pitting regional, political, tribal and sectarian rivals against each other. The Houthis have seized control of the Yemeni capital, Sana'a, and overrun the homes of top officials, leading former President Abdrabbu Mansour Hadi and his government to resign. The Houthi group said it would impose a so-called presidential council in a unilateral declaration that was initially rejected by most other factions in the country. However, the United Nations envoy Jamal bin Omar said new talks between the Houthis and other parties would take place.
We will withdraw because there is no commitment so far. The peaceful protests will not be attacked and oppressed, and also because this dialogue is nothing but a cover for the coup. We will not continue in this dialogue unless the constitutional announcement is cancelled.
US President Barack Obama and German Chancellor Angela Merkel held talks at the White House as pressure builds to arm Ukrainian forces. Obama said his administration is looking at all options in handling the crisis, while Merkel is set to argue against arming Ukraine in its conflict against Russian-backed rebels. More in this report.
U.S. President Barack Obama hosts German Chancellor Angela Merkel at the White House Monday against a backdrop of war raging in eastern Ukraine. While Obama is facing mounting pressure at home to arm Ukraine in its battle for the East, Obama signaled he has made no such decision yet.
Now, it is true that if, in fact, diplomacy fails, what I've asked my team to do is to look at all options. What other means can we put in place to change Mr. Putin's calculus? And the possibility of lethal defensive weapons is one of those options that's being examined. But I have not made a decision about that yet.
This is in line with the posture of Merkel, who, speaking through a translator, says she wants a political solution to the crisis.
We continue to pursue a diplomatic solution, although we have suffered a lot of setbacks. These days we will see whether all sides are ready and willing to come to a negotiated settlement. I've always said I don't see a military solution to this conflict, but we have to put all our efforts in bringing about a diplomatic solution. So,
thank you very much, everybody.
Merkel, along with her French and Ukrainian counterparts, is expected to hold meetings later this week with Russian President Vladimir Putin in an effort to end the crisis that has already claimed more than 5,000 lives.
Football legend David Beckham pledged to change the lives of millions of children as he launched 7, a new fund with UNICEF to protect the world's most vulnerable youngsters. The fund, named after Beckham's lucky number on his England and Manchester United shirts, will focus on children at risk of violence, abuse or disease. Beckham is also making 10 years as a goodwill or marking 10 years as a goodwill ambassador for the UN Children's Fund. The launch of 7 comes after one of the worst years for children on record, according to UNICEF. Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger insisted on looking forward to playing bottom of the table Leicester City. At a press conference, Wenger said his side should not be looking back at Saturday's 2-1 defeat by North London rivals Tottenham Hotspur. Leicester play Arsenal at the Emirates Stadium tomorrow. Arsenal will be hoping to bounce back from the Spurs' loss, as Leicester have not won at Arsenal for nearly 42 years and been beaten there on their last 7 league visits. And Bundesliga champions Bayern Munich returned to the training ground after defeating struggling Stuttgart 2-0 on Saturday, with Arjen Robben and David Alaba both scoring sensational goals either side of the break. Bayern's first win of the year kept them 8 points clear at the top. Second-placed Wolfsburg continued their fine run with a 3-0 home win over Hoffenheim. Bayern are set to face Hamburger in Munich in the league on Saturday before returning to the Champions League, where the 2013 champions travelled to Shakhtar Donetsk for the round of 16 first leg clash on February 17th. Finally, a look at the weather forecast. Cold tonight in most areas and dusty in the country's south, with the southwesterly brisk winds. Relatively cold and partly cloudy weather will prevail tomorrow across the hilly areas, with brisk to gusty winds at times. There will be a chance for rain in the late night hours tomorrow in the northern regions, which will extend later to the central regions. Aqaba should expect fair conditions with northerly brisk winds and high seas. The weatherman warns of poor visibility due to dust across much of the country tomorrow. Next to the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To close our top stories once again. His Majesty the King and Bahrain's monarch discussed ties in the region and agreed that the war on terror is a war to protect Islam and its moderate and tolerant teachings. The King and the US Special Presidential Envoy for the Global Coalition to Counter Daesh discussed developments in the war against the terrorist organization. And the King checks on the Jordan National Center for Amputee Rehabilitation, which provides prosthetic limbs to injured armed forces personnel. And thank you so much for your time. Have a good night.